Okay, there we go. So I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes. I'm going to put my timer on so I can just check the time as I'm going along. So I'm talking about, as I said, student motivation and teacher beliefs. And I've called this "Never the Twain Shall Meet." I understand this is a quote from Rudyard Kipling from one of his poems. So never the two will meet. In other words, this is the idea that student motivation very often does not match what a teacher believes is the right thing for their students. They have different motivations. They believe that what they want should be what's taught. And this can sometimes lead to demotivation because the teacher doesn't buy into what the student wants. The teacher has the belief that I'm the authority, I'm the one that decides, I know what's best for you. So without further ado, let's move on. Why this topic? Well, I've had the recent penchant in my own research to go for autoethnography. This is when you research your own history and you look back at your experiences and your life, and you decide to analyze this through the lens of literature and theories to try and come up with something worthwhile to say, I guess, which is good feedback to yourself, but it's also interesting for other people to know. So I wrote a paper a couple of years ago on leadership and management, and how I did an autoethnography of my own career in leadership and management to see what I could glean from that. And then I also did something recently to look at my research career. My apologies if you can see a green line on the screen. I'm not sure where that came from. It wasn't me, but I hope it will disappear. If not, I hope it won't affect the slides that you can see. And I'm now old enough to reflect on a career. So I've been doing this for about 32, 33 years. And so it's always a good time to sort of look back and to think about what you've done and to see whether you can actually share something which might be of use to other people or may lead them to reflect in the similar way if they have a similar level of experience. So I do recognize this dichotomy of student motivation and teacher belief, and how this can sometimes, excuse me, this can sometimes lead to clashes or differences of opinion in the learning environment. Now, most theory on teacher beliefs will suggest that they remain pretty fixed. So we have very strong beliefs and quite individual. So we agree on many things, but on many things we don't agree. But once we go into the classroom setting, we are most comfortable, I guess, if we are teaching the way that we believe the student should be taught. So what we think is the right way to learn, that's what we tend to try to use in the classroom. This may change over time, and I think my own example will show that it does, that we adapt our teacher beliefs. But as a former mentor of mine said, you know, you only change your beliefs through experience. So basically, something has to go wrong for you to think, right, this isn't working. I have to rethink this. Excuse me. As I said, I've got a frog in my throat this morning. So while teacher beliefs remain fairly fixed, student motivations, of course, they can change, especially if we are changing our job and going from one context to another context, teaching a different kind of student, maybe in a different place. So in that sense, we're going to come across different student motivations throughout our career. It's quite possible. And it may be that our teacher beliefs, which are quite fixed, will not fit into all of these contexts. Of course, even if we stay a long time in one institution, this doesn't mean that student motivations won't change. The same as I said, teacher beliefs may change over time. So will student motivations. If we think back to our own time, if you're my age and you think back to when you were at school and you compare it to what students nowadays expect and what motivates them, there is of course a great difference to that. And in the context of learning English, this may also be changing. So something has to give. Either we need to get our students to change their motivations to fit our beliefs, or we have to consider re-examining our beliefs in the context in which we teach. In other words, if it's not working, something needs to change. Now, this is not going to be a theoretical presentation. I don't want to go into a lot of detail on that. I want to talk more about my story. So I'd let you know something about my experiences, but I will take a brief look at language learning motivation. I'm going to gloss over it really, just taking two motivational theories from second language learning. So Gardner's motivational theory, I'll come to the two definitions in a minute, but Gardner worked a lot with Lambert, and they see language learning is a combination of desire, effort, and attitudes to language learning. So the desire that a student has to learn it, the effort they're willing to put in, and also their positive, hopefully, attitude to the target language will lead to them being successful. And success, therefore, is not dependent on ability or aptitude. So somebody who could have quite an aptitude for language learning, but is not interested in learning a particular language, may not be as successful as someone who does not have that aptitude, but really, really wants to learn that language. And the reason why we might want to do that is covered by two orientations, according to Gardner. That is integrative orientation. That's when you have a desire as an individual to learn this language, versus instrumental orientation, where you take a more pragmatic view. So for example, it's interesting for me to learn this language because I can get a better job. Now, there's probably a combination of both in most of our language learners' minds, but there may be an orientation towards one side or the other, depending on the individual. What Gardner is proposing is that integrative orientation generally leads to more success. So it's about what the student wants to do that will lead to potential success. Now, Decky and Ryan also follow this pattern, but they look at it through the lens of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is more aligned to instrumental orientation in the sense that there are things on the outside which motivate you to study a language. Maybe more opportunity in life, maybe you just have to because it's the rule and you have to pass the exam to pass your school diploma or your degree. And then we have intrinsic, which is more from the inside. So intrinsic will include self-determination. This means that you really, really want to determine yourself how you're going to learn. And you might even do that without a teacher, for example. But if you are in a learning environment, then you need that social integration. You need to have that interaction with fellow students and teachers. And the level of difficulty needs to be appropriate for you to be successful. So this is what Decky and Ryan are including under the term intrinsic motivation. And we'll come back to that later. So you're probably already guessing where my standpoint is on who should change in this relation, in this standoff, this dichotomy. If I could find the dream job with dream students, then I win, okay? I don't need to change my teacher beliefs because I'm gonna teach what I believe in, and the students in front of me, they will completely buy into my beliefs, and they will willingly study according to what I believe is the right way to learn a language. This is the ideal job. How many of us have this job, have ever found it? Very, very few, I would assume. Generally speaking, we're in one of the other scenarios where we have to make compromises one way or the other to get a job, to get a salary, you know, to put food on the table. So this, to a certain degree, means I lose. I can't 100% implement my teacher beliefs because my context, my environment does not allow it. So what I've come to consider over the years is that it is my duty to use my skill and experience as an educator to adapt to my students' motivations for studying English or studying in English, be those motivations intrinsic or extrinsic. I believe it's my duty to adapt. Students adapt in other ways, I guess, to my teaching style and so on. But basically, I need to be aware of what their motivations are. And this will hopefully lead to their success. So this is my standpoint, my thesis, and this is what I'm going to be arguing through the rest of the session. Now, I'm going to give you a quick potted history of my teaching career. And I want to focus here on the level of student motivation that I found, the extent to which I was able to adhere to my teaching beliefs, and how I was then evaluated by my students. So way back when I was a mere pup, I was still a university student. I did some summer school teaching in the UK with teenagers who were coming for a part holiday, part language learning. So the stakes were not very high. Students just wanted to interact, they wanted to speak. And so because this was in the period of communicative language teaching, I could pretty much apply my teacher beliefs. And so my adherence to my beliefs was very high. And the students liked it, they got what they wanted. And so I was generally well evaluated. I then moved to Spain and worked in a language school. And my students there were mainly teenagers and adults. Stakes were medium. I mean, a lot of the teenagers, they came for help with their English in school. But internally to our language institute, there was not really any sort of high stakes. We just gave them tests and let them pass on to the next level within our institution. Some students did do Cambridge exams, like the first certificate or the advanced or PET or CET. So that was a little bit higher, I guess. So that's why I put medium for stakes. And their motivations, of course, were different. So I was teaching different kinds of classes with different kinds of motivations. So certainly, I would say I adhered to my beliefs, firstly in how to teach general English to help kids in school, and also how to teach exam preparation. I had my beliefs in that, I applied them, and that was all okay. And generally speaking, I got decent evaluations. I then moved into higher education. I went to work in a university in the Netherlands, where I was in the Faculty of Economics and Management, so teaching a lot of ESP, English for Specific Purposes, to undergrad students. The stakes were suddenly higher. They had to pass. And the students there in Holland, they were really great, to be honest. I mean, they really wanted to learn. They were already very talented and competent and independent learners. And this was a problem-based learning university. So I learned about problem-based learning. That became part of my philosophy, my teaching philosophy. And so therefore, one of my beliefs. And so I was able to apply it. And generally speaking, the students were happy. I then went to work in the branch campus of the same university here in Qatar. So I was teaching undergrad students. The stakes were high, but the students were different. And here we come to this first example of how the context changes, and you have to maybe sort of reconsider that how you used to do things doesn't always work. What was interesting when I came to Qatar is that it was clear to me that although the students did want to learn, for them, most important was a pass and a grade. I was still able to stick to my beliefs because I was teaching PBL, but the students found PBL very, very difficult. They liked me as a person. I still actually have contact with many of those students. So I got good evaluations, but the qualitative comments would also include, he's really tough, he's really strict, you know, and we find it really, really hard. So I didn't get quite the same kind of evaluation as I got back in the home campus. After that, I moved to the UAE and I worked in a government college teaching Emirati nationals foundation English and diploma English. Again, they had to pass. They had a very similar orientation as my students in Qatar regarding their motivations. I started in this job by sticking to my beliefs. And then, as I'll explain later, I changed that strategy based on my experiences. So I started to veer away from my beliefs. And one reason I did this is because at the beginning, my evaluations were not particularly good. And so I adapted and then they became better. Now, we shouldn't be party to, judging our success on student evaluations, but I certainly give them far more credence than many other teachers do. I'd rather know what my students think than my superiors. I think we don't often give enough ear and voice to our students, and I'll be coming back to that later. I then moved back to Dubai. I was in the UAE in Sharjah, then I went into the Emirate of Dubai, and I taught research foundation courses to students, high stakes. They were very good students. They really wanted to learn. They were had very good aptitude, application. They were very intrinsically motivated, I would say. So again, I could switch back to adhering to my beliefs in teaching, and generally speaking, the students were very happy. I'm currently, for the last this is my 6th year now, I'm back in Qatar in a government college. So teaching very similar students to the government college in the UAE, where they are focusing very much on passing rather than learning. Here, I have not forgone completely my teaching beliefs, but I would say my adherence is medium to low, and I get very good evaluations. Again, it's not just about getting good evaluations. It's about, I don't see it that way. I see it as doing what my students feel that they need and taking into account their perspective. So I'm going to show this table again, but I'm going to sort of put it into career phases, if you like. So back in the early days, when the stakes were not so high, I could adhere to my beliefs, and students were happy with that. In the universities that I taught in the Netherlands, in Qatar the first time, and then in Dubai, again, I did stick to my beliefs to a great degree. My adherence was high, but the evaluation varied, I would say, and that gives an indication that the student body changed slightly each time, and so I didn't get the same sort of positive reaction like in Dubai as I got in the management university in Qatar. And then finally, and the most interesting, I think, is working in government colleges in the UAE and Qatar. Very, very similar students, similar motivations. And as you can see, I made a change in my adherence to my beliefs in those two institutions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in detail in the next few slides. So what are my beliefs? I think I should share them with you. Well, when I apply for a job, when I have to do my teaching philosophy, I talk about my personal triptych. And that is, communicative language teaching, which has stayed with me since the 90s, I guess. Problem-based learning, which I learned in that Dutch university, which I still use tangentially in the way that I interact with students. I do a lot of Socrative questioning with them and things like this. And finally, humanistic teaching. And this is the key one, which I think is the bedrock of what I'm trying to say today. So these, I can say through my career, have been added to chronologically. Had I written my teaching philosophy in the 90s, I would have said CLT, CLT, CLT. Then I discovered PBL. I thought, this is amazing. I wanted to include that. And finally, at a certain point, I decided I need to look at a more humanistic angle to teaching, and that now forms this triptych of my beliefs. So I adapted my beliefs each time I encountered a new type of student. So maybe our beliefs are not as fixed as we would like to think. So what about student motivations? Well, we talked about Decky and Ryan and the concepts of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So the kind of intrinsic motivation that students may have is a personal desire to pass with a good grade. Possibly secondary to that in some contexts is to improve. I want to improve my English. Maybe they want to focus on one particular skill, you know. I can remember back in when I was a teacher in the early days, and students would come to the Language Institute and say, I want to improve my speaking. And you go, no, 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 no. You can't just improve. You have to learn everything. You have to have, you have to learn the language, you need to focus on all 4 skills. Were that same student to come in now and ask me, I would have a different perspective. I would say, okay, you want to improve your speaking, so let's work on that. Again, experience tells us a lot and teaches us a lot, I believe. Another reason why people may want to learn a language is to become more employable and then to interact with others. And there are many, many more. Extrinsic motivation could be that you have to pass this course as part of a degree or certificate. You won't get promoted at work unless you have a degree, and that degree includes, for example, learning English. Sometimes to keep a job, and I know in the world of L1 and L2 language teachers in some parts of the world, it's really not fair that some teachers have to pass an IELTS in order to keep a job. This has happened in the Gulf region, and really it's wrong, but this is the reality. And then to meet others' expectations, you know, maybe your parents have an expectation that you will do well in your course, and so you feel a pressure to do that. Along with motivations are, of course, demotivations. Sometimes students are put into a classroom where they just find the level too difficult. They feel that they have been forced to do this course, and this is actually my current reality, where a lot of our students, they don't particularly want to do English courses, but they have to do them. They may not be used to the preferred pedagogy. So here we have that clash with teacher beliefs. So you may be teaching them in a way which they don't want to learn. Also, in many environments, I feel students are often battered by high stakes assessment. Now, some students love this, they love tests, but others, it puts them under a lot of stress. And I call it the killer of creativity, because I think to grow, you have to take risks. And if you take risks, you may fail, you may fall, you have to get up again. But when everything is high stakes, you don't take those risks, you just play safe. And that way you don't really grow. This is just a personal view. There is, of course, with English, this hue of imperialism. You know, the fact that this idea of empire and post-colonial sort of attitudes to English, and why should we be learning this language? We should be focusing on our local language, which are, of course, very valid feelings. Some students just don't want to study it. And I'm very sympathetic to that, by the way. Having said that, in previous research I've done, I found that students actually don't, in the Gulf context, don't really pay too much attention to that. They sometimes say, why do I have to do this? Not because they have any sort of negative attitude towards English, but they want to study their major in Arabic. So they're thinking, why do I have to pass an English course to study in Arabic? Which I think is a very valid perspective. Very often they say, I will improve my English later. You know, I think that's a fair point. There is this fear of making mistakes. You know, it's not like other subjects where you are studying them in your mother tongue, and therefore you can communicate in the written and the oral form comfortably. Here you might make mistakes, you may get embarrassed, especially if you're an adult. They are more prone to embarrassment if they get things wrong. And then, of course, sometimes the institutional requirements of the study say you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to have so many assessments. And that can demotivate as well. Sometimes students will say, why do you have so many tests? Why can't we just, like, you know, practice and grow? But, you know, in this age of objectivity and assessment, we are really straitjacketed in that respect. We constantly have to assess our students and submit grades. So let's go back to, I'm going to go back in a minute to the two highlighted situations which are most relevant for my current teaching situation and come later in my career. But before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about a case study from myself and my trauma in trying to learn Arabic. Now, I've worked in different countries around in my career. I've worked in Holland, I've worked in Spain, I've worked in England, Germany, and I have always learned the language where I went to a good level. I passed state exams, and I have been, if not fluent, then almost fluent. I've lived in the Arabic world, in the Arab world in the Gulf for 22 years. I do not speak Arabic. I have a smattering of Arabic. It doesn't mean that I didn't try. So I'm looking at myself now as the student. My own efforts to learn Arabic have been a disaster. Why? Because when I've taken a teacher or joined a course, I found that the pedagogy is bogged down in cultural associations of the language. Because Arabic is, is linked in many ways to the Quran, and this is, of course, something which is very important to the cultures and societies. This, I feel, is my feeling, this seeps into the way that Arabic is taught. So the pedagogy is driven by these associations. So interlanguage or mistakes are not acceptable. You cannot speak a pidgin version of Arabic. It has to be exactly right. So when you start learning it, it's all about the the alphabet, the sounds, and so you're repeating like you are in, I'm sorry to say, like in KG or something like this. You're an adult. My motivations for learning the language were to try to be able to follow meetings at work where I was in management, and people switched into Arabic, so I could then at least follow. Regarding producing the language, I had no desire to speak perfect Arabic. As long as I could communicate what I wanted to say, that was my motivation for learning. I did not get that from any of the courses I ever took over the last 20 years. The only success I had is when I took on this idea of self-determination from Decky and Ryan, and I said, right, I'm going to learn on my own. Because I'm motivated, I want to learn. So I got books, I studied myself, and in a very short time, I was actually able to start communicating sentences, and people were amazed because it happened very quickly, because I had that integrative and intrinsic drive to try to learn this language. Yes, I made loads of mistakes, but it didn't matter. I was able to communicate. I've kind of lost it over the years, but that was the only time I was really successful in learning Arabic, because I learned according to my motivation, not what the teacher told me I should be doing and how I should be learning. So what about the situation of the two colleges? Well, when I went to the UAE, this was my first time teaching Gulf Arab, so a different context, different culture. I was teaching levels ranging from the CEFR A2 to B2. And in the first semester, I taught women. I stuck to the script because it was a very oppressive management structure there. I didn't want to do anything wrong. So I just did what I thought I should do. And my feedback from the students was average, I would say. I then went to the men's college in the second semester, and I was advised by my colleagues, loosen up a bit, because the men will not accept it if you are too strict. So my senior students were happy, but my juniors, they absolutely destroyed me in my first evaluation, my one and only time in my career where I've received really poor evaluations. So this was a stone in my shoe moment. This was something which I had to resolve. It was a pain, and I had to do something about it. So this is when I brought humanism into my triptych of my teaching philosophy. I started to say, well, let me find out what it is that motivates them. So I let them have a couple of meetings while I was sitting on the outside where they spoke to each other about why they didn't like the class. And I listened and I took notes, and then I made a plan for them. I said, right, guys, we're going to do this. Thankfully, after that, my evaluations improved a lot because they felt that I was listening to them. So when I came back to teaching Gulf Arabs a second time, which is my current job, again, with the same kind of levels, I learned from my mistakes. So now my current strategy is that I always survey my students at the beginning of each course on their motivations. What do they want from this course? Why are they doing it? And then I reflect, when I see the results, I reflect on the extent to which I can match these student motivations with my beliefs and my values. And then I adapt the course within the given parameters of the college. I adapt my pedagogy within those given parameters. And I always do an early course feedback session on my teaching. So after 3 or 4 weeks, I send out a survey. Are you happy with me? Are you happy with the way I teach? Just to see if I'm on the right track. So summing up, I've got about 30 seconds left. I think we question, we say, oh, the students are not motivated. But do we ask them what their motivation is? Is that part of our plan? Or do we believe that we are the sage on the stage, the master of all, and what we believe in, in how they should be taught, that is what they should buy into. Find out about their lives and their motivations. So, and then without completely compromising your own beliefs and values and working within those extrinsically determined parameters, adjust your approach to what they want and see if it makes a difference. You should try it out. If you feel your students are not motivated, try it out and see whether they have just different motivations from you. And then if you adapt, maybe you'll see that they will also be very, very happy. So final musings, I'm sorry, I've gone a little bit over time. Just give me another minute or so. As vocational professionals, we do tend to torture ourselves a bit, but this does show how we care. We're always thinking about our students. So we constantly question our actions in relation to how it affects our students. We ask ourselves these questions. Do I feel comfortable about foregoing some of my beliefs? Well, now I'm happy with that. When I was younger, I would steadfastly stick to my beliefs. Do I feel I'm selling my students short because I'm not following my beliefs? No. It's what they want. And as long as we are moving towards the learning objectives, then I don't feel I'm selling my students short. Am I behaving professionally? I think I am, because I'm adapting to my context. Am I exercising integrity? I would never cut corners with the students, but I would certainly adjust the way that I do things to make them feel more comfortable in my classroom. And I'll end with just one student soundbite. I actually wanted to show some more, but I can't access my work platforms at the moment. But there was one that I got from a group last year. We also need to be motivated. And student feedback is extremely important in that regard. It can really demotivate us when it's negative. I'm not saying that I do things just to get good feedback, but when you get that good feedback, it really gives you such a boost as a teacher. As people say, this is why we teach, when we see our students really value our efforts. So this was a question that was asked in an end of course survey. And I asked the students, if you could go back to the start of the course, what advice would you give the teacher on how to make the course better? Now, this particular group, I was blown away by their feedback because it made me feel so great. But I just want to share with you one that really picks at, I think, what I'm trying to say in the presentation today. She said, Dr. Michael King, what am I going to write is not an opinion, it's really a fact. If you ask all of his students, they will answer the same. Accuracy, order, organization, giving the student all of their rights, really important, and the confidence to ask and try till they got it. All of these properties, and sorry for not mentioning the rest because I have a word limit, are what all students need. My advice to the doctor is to continue the way he is because it is really super perfect. Sorry that I'm massaging my own ego here, but I think everybody wants to get that kind of feedback from their students. Thank you so much. That's me done. And I hope that you took away something useful from the session.
Dr. King, I loved how you dug deep into your own experiences to tell us more about the challenges you faced while teaching English and also how you motivated your students. Your students certainly think that you are doing a great job of it. And I can say the same with confidence because I know about your integrity, about your dedication to your profession. We can all learn from that. We not only owe you one for your riveting presentation, but there's more to be thankful for. For one, we dragged you out of your R&R in your staycation, photos of which are looking amazing, by the way, on Facebook. Despite that, you took out the time and you were here, gave a wonderful presentation. It was really detailed and very observant. But apart from that, I'm also grateful to you for rescuing us when we could not play John Leave's video. Thank you very much.
My pleasure on all counts.